Call the meeting to order. Thank you all for your patience. Actually, by our procedure bylaw, we have to call the meeting to order within 15 minutes of its scheduled start time. We got all kinds of time. We made it. And as I said earlier, my apologies for the delay. We have had meetings nonstop since early this afternoon, and the last one has gone a little bit longer, but we're ready to go. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our first item tonight is a very special presentation. I'd like to invite Mr. Sandy Burpee to come forward, and the purpose of this is for the City of Coquitlam to present the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal to himself.
There we go. Now you get to stand there awkwardly for a moment while I say nice things about you.
This feels like a sentence.
Please step up to the bar. Do you have anything to say before I pronounce? We're here tonight to honor one of our very distinguished community members with City Council's choice for the Diamond Jubilee Medal. This new commemorative medal was created to mark the 2012 celebrations of the 60th anniversary of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's accession to the throne as Queen of Canada. It's words you don't use very often. And particularly, it recognizes the significant contributions and achievements by Canadians. And the individual we're here tonight to celebrate has certainly earned this recognition. Sandy Burpee, the chair of the Tri-Cities Homelessness Task Group, has been involved in addressing the challenges of homelessness in the Tri-Cities communities of Coquitlam, Port Coquitlam, and Port Moody for many years. He's one of the original members of the task force when it began advocating for homelessness issues. Sandy's been instrumental in many of the accomplishments that the Tri-Cities Homelessness Task Group has achieved so far. The Cold Wet Weather Mat Program, the 3030 Gordon Shelter, the YWCA facility on Como Lake. All of these things would not have been possible without Sandy's tireless efforts and support. He has brought forward a truly significant issue in our community, one that has been very difficult at times for some residents to accept. But without Sandy patiently working with other organizations, councils, staff, members of the public, we'd not be here today with those successes being able to be attributed in large measure to Sandy's work. He's done many other things. He is a search and rescue volunteer. There's lots of other things on his bio, but Council focused on his work on homelessness in putting forward his name for this award. Admittedly, we have a long road ahead of us on the issue of homelessness, but it's good to know that Sandy will be involved along the way and will continue to bring his enthusiasm and dedication to this important issue. And so on behalf of Coquitlam City Council and the entire City of Coquitlam, I'd like to award Mr. Sandy Burpee the Queen Elizabeth II Diamond Jubilee Medal for significant contributions and achievements. There's a certificate, a letter that explains it, and a guide for wearing it. You put it right here, and I can see it now. And there it is, this beautiful medal. You deserve it so much.
Well, thank you very much. It's my honor to receive it.
Now, Council would like to have a photo with you, if that's okay.
Sure, my pleasure.
And we brought this guy because, well, it really adds a sense of nobility to the photo.
Okay.
Come on. Council, we'll get up. Now, there's another recipient in the audience. Would you like to step forward?
No, this is...
Okay. There's a uniform here.
This wants to be beside the uniform.
Oh, they're going to tweet here. They're going to tweet. Oh, he'll email it to you. Yeah. Okay.
It's paparazzi.
Could I just say a very few words?
Please
here?
do. Please do.
I'm truly honored to receive the medal, and not so much because of the nature of the medal, but because it's coming from the City of Coquitlam and Council. That means a lot to me, and quite frankly, I probably wouldn't have continued to do what I've been doing in the way of homelessness and affordable housing without the City and in particular Council being willing to engage in the issue of housing and affordable housing. So thank you very much.
Well, Well, you can tell when someone is pretty passionate about an issue. I give some thought back about 5 years to a public hearing in this very hall, a public hearing that lasted till 3 a.m., a public hearing on an issue that Sandy and many others felt very strongly about. That was the public hearing on the cold, wet weather mat program. His diligence then, his diligence on 3030 Gordon, these are the things that achieve world-changing events, and you have changed the world here for a great many people in Coquitlam, and on behalf of Council, thank you so much. And before we move to Council's agenda, there are other people in Coquitlam who have been honored by this wonderful award, and I want to talk about one of them on behalf of Council, because there's many Council members who've had a deep personal involvement with this recipient. Sue Haberger was presented in absentia. She was not able to make the presentation, but she was presented with this wonderful honor at a ceremony at the Vancouver Golf Club put on by a member of Parliament, Finn Donnelly, a former council member, and some MLAs. Related to those senior governments, presentations of medals rather. These aren't pins, these are medals. And she truly deserved it. Her mother was able to accept it on her behalf because she was ill, and she has since passed away. And I'm going to read the bio that was presented at the time. I was actually going to ask two members of Council if they wanted to have some words, and I'll still leave the microphone open afterwards if either of them does, or if any of members of Council do. But at least a couple of them said, no, this is, just read the words. So here, Sue's exemplary volunteer work for the past 2 decades has been on behalf of the Riverview Horticultural Center Society to protect Riverview Hospital. She actively participates in official city committees, the annual Tree Fest, and is an articulate spokesperson when giving presentations to the public. Sue is probably best known for her musical group called the Raging Greenies, which is dedicated to raising awareness regarding the Riverview Hospital site. This June, thanks to Sue's efforts, Heritage Foundation Canada placed Riverview at the top of Canada's most endangered heritage sites list. About 10 days ago, Sue left our world, and but she has a long legacy here, and I want to invite any members of council that had anything to add. I met Sue only related to the Riverview Hospital site, where I've lived near there all my life, and to see the amount of effort that's been put into preserving that special place, those 250 acres of magnificence, it was truly inspiring to see Sue and so many others who remain, so many who've gone already, but so many who remain to work on that issue. And someone who was very close to with Sue and her husband, Terry O'Neill.
Thank you very much. This is quite a surprise, and I'm very pleased to see this remembrance of Sue. She and her husband, her late husband, were very good friends of my wife and mine. And she left explicit instructions to her family and friends to be joyous and to embrace life and to celebrate the moment. And so we are all trying to do our best as we continue to remember her wonderful smile, her quick wit, her tremendous vitality, her genius level memory for lyrics of songs. She just didn't write songs. She knew 10 or 15,000 songs by heart, and a great guitar player and folk singer. But she may be more remembered for her teaching, a math teacher, primarily at Centennial for about 3 decades. And when she would often integrate her love of song with her teaching of complex mathematical formulas, and she would put some of these formulas to song. And there was a remembrance written about her on the Tri-City News website in connection with the Friday's column written by Diane Strandberg, saying that from a former student who said that when he was first introduced to one of these little ditties that he thought was kind of silly and rather like kindergarten, but several years later when he was struggling with a math exam in university, that song came to him and he remembered that complex formula and was able to answer the question. So it's quite something. So I've got a smile on my face remembering Sue Haberger. So thank you for allowing me to share that with you.
Thank you. Perhaps I should try to remember some of the rules of order of council chambers here by putting them to song. Councillor Sikora, no. Mr. Clerk.
Clerk may disengage your mic at that point. Item 2 is the minutes of the regular council meeting held Monday, February 4th. Recommendations to approve those minutes. Second.
Moved by Councillor Asmunsen, seconded by Councillor Hodge. All in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Item 3 is the minutes of the Joint Family Court and Youth Justice Committee meeting of Thursday, January 17th. The recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, seconded by Councillor Sikora. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 4 is the minutes of the Sport Council meeting held Tuesday, January 22nd. The recommendations to receive those minutes.
Moved by Councillor Robinson, seconded by Councillor Hodge. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
The next item concerns a item of business arising out of that committee's meeting, and it's the draft 2013 work plan, and the recommendation for the work plan is before you.
Moved by Councillor Hodge, second by Councillor Nicholson. Councillor Rasmussen.
Just in respect to the item of the sports field strategy workshop, is that doing in advance of the CFSA, or how is that being handled? That was a question to the chair.
Oh, okay. We'll go to that. Councillor Hodge, you have just 1 second. 1 second.
It's expected that they will have input into to it. I'm not sure in what order. It's always a challenge with these is that we expect some input from user groups, but my expectation on that is that once the strategy has come before council, it will then go to the group for input, which would not be in advance of the CSSA, I don't believe. So.
Okay.
Okay. Seeing none others, motion is the minutes. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Oh, sorry, the motion was...
Second item of business arising out of that committee's meeting concerns the 2013 Sport Council meeting schedule. The committee's request is that council amend the Sports Council's terms of reference to allow the committee to meet 6 times per year rather than the 4 times per year indicated in the current terms of reference.
Second.
Moved by Councillor Hodge, second by Councillor Sikora. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously. Taking on more work and meeting more often. On a bunch of keeners. Yes.
Item 5 is the Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw 4382, and the staff recommendation the council give first, second, and third readings to Fees and Charges Amendment Bylaw number 4382.
Moved by Councillor Reamer, second by Councillor O'Neill. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 6 is the 2013 Capital Program Loan Authorization Bylaw. This Bylaw 4385, and this is in order to support the long-term borrowing for growth-related infrastructure. The 3-part recommendations that council give first, second, and third readings to see if Coquitlam's 2013 Capital Program Loan Authorization Bylaw number 4385. The council approved the attached elector response form with a deadline of receipt of Monday, April 15th, and that the number of electors in the city of Coquitlam for the purpose of this process be confirmed as 82,839.
Moved by Councillor Edmondson, second by Councillor Hodge. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you very much. The long term is 20 years, am I correct? Okay, thank you. Secondly, it will not impact the existing taxpayer. That means it's going to come from, all the money is going to come from BCCs?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, this is... Okay, Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I just want to confirm with staff that we have used this process before.
Yes, we have. We used that for the widening of Coast Meridian Road.
And we didn't have any problems. Like, it worked just as we predicted it would work, and everything was...
Yep, no problem at all.
Great.
How many thousands of people expressed an interest in the issue?
Maybe the clerk can help me with that one.
Far less than 100.
Far less than 100, yeah. This is actually to allow us to go in advance and do some servicing, put the services in actually as we need them rather than at a greater cost later on, borrowing the money at a very, very low rate and having the development eventually repay that cost, so it doesn't come out of taxpayers' dollars at all. So this is a win-win, and from the developer's perspective, actually considered a win as well, because they get those services installed right now. So, motion's on the floor. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
Item 7 is an application for a permanent change to a liquor license for a liquor primary establishment. This is the Townhall Public House located at 925 Brunette Avenue. The recommendation before council is to support or not to support the application, and secondly, to have the report of the city clerk be forwarded to the LCLB as council's comments on the matter.
It's too late. Councillor Hodge has already moved A. I'm waiting for a seconder. Okay, sorry. The motion is A, seconded by Councillor Sikora. Councillor Sikora.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. You know, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. The fact is, in the next few weeks, if we go this way, we'll have probably in order of quite a few applications coming to us on a weekly basis to the council meetings. And I think that, you know, I mentioned then before, and I'll mention it again. I think we need to, as a council, come together and set a time where every pub and every restaurant can operate under the same hours. I know that the Liquor Control Board doesn't have to adhere to it, but I think a letter from the mayor and council, City of Coquitlam, would they pay attention. I think it's very, very important to us that the fact is that there's no one pub or one restaurant or whatever take advantage of another one. or be able to stay open later. And, for me, if the pubs are, and as you see, the first application came about 6 weeks ago, and now they're all coming up one after the other, because everybody will want the same kind of hours. And a lot of pubs don't really want these extended hours, but because there's an application in from other pubs, they don't want them to have an upper hand. Also, what concerns me, Mayor, is the fact is that some of these pubs, they have restaurants in them. They close a restaurant and they got an extra about 100 seats for a pub. And not only that, when will it become a cabaret? I know cabaret licenses are you don't have cabaret licenses anymore, but I can guarantee it'll be run like a cabaret. It'll be open till 2 o'clock in the morning, and what else is going to be is going to be a cabaret. So I myself think that we need to limit the hours that the pubs are open, and especially every restaurant and every that has a liquor license and every pub that has a liquor license should be restricted to the hours that they have been set and laughed at. So there's no one leapfrogging go over top of the other. Okay? Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Hodge.
Yeah, I don't want to support this going forward because I have some concerns, and this is the second one now in 2 weeks. We know there's others coming, and I'm concerned that what's happening here is we're through, I guess, precedent or previous ones that we've supported or not supported. We're actually sort of setting policy through applications. And I think that what we really need to do is to look at this community-wide and possibly look at this more from a community planning standpoint and try to sort of see what we want for the community. Maybe there's certain areas that later hours are appropriate or different types of licensing. But I'm just concerned that we're dealing with this as a sort of ad hoc, one-off, and then next week another one comes. And I think we really need to sort of, take a step back for a month or two and sort of look at, what we have coming in terms of applications, where our establishments are located, and what the community wants. And it may be that this is what the community wants, but I'm just concerned that what we're getting is, one after another, and I don't think that's fair to the applicants as well, because they go through a significant process and invest time and money to go through the application process, and I think they sort of deserve to know if there's an appetite for certain licensing in certain hours in certain areas. So I would feel better if we, maybe we could get a report from staff or work on this through community planning and see if there's more of a global view that we can take, of a citywide view that we can take on these applications.
Yep. I tend to agree. Last meeting we had a long discussion that centered on another pub that's not on a bus route, and we recall there was a lot of concern. I expressed my concern that we really should be locating that kind of facility somewhere where people have an option as to not have to drive to it. This facility actually is is on a bus route. It's within walking distance of a SkyTrain station. It's a different situation entirely than was the case at the last application at Mickey's. So I think that while I want some consistency, I essentially want the criteria. Let's lay out the criteria ahead of time. Let's make it so that everyone understands that if you're near a bus route and in a residential neighborhood, we're going to be primarily concerned with your neighbors and not with the transit because you're near a bus route. But if the opposite applies, we might not be concerned with your neighbors because you don't have any residential neighbors, as Mickey's didn't have any residential neighbors, and yet we rejected that or sent our opposition to that application. So letting folks know ahead of time how we feel and what we believe the criteria ought to be, and ultimately where we're leaning. Are we leaning toward 1 o'clock on Friday and Saturday and midnight on, or what is it we're contemplating as a council? Because the current situation is too ad hoc for me. It allows that everybody has to make an application because their competition is making an application, and so off they go to City Council. We should be more systemic, I think, to the extent that the legislation allows us, although it's clear that the legislation, we've had our criticisms of the way in which this process works or doesn't work. But to the extent that it does work, we should try to make it work a little bit more consistently. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll simply speak in support of the motion that we not support this application, and I agree. We need to come up with a process so that people know what the views of council are before they go to all this trouble. Submit applications that are likely to find support. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you. Well, I have spoken up many times about the liquor licenses, and not only for the pubs, but for the restaurants, because we're getting a lot of restaurants in the community, and Councillor Sikora is always worried about them turning into cabarets. Well, in a sense, a lot of them are, and some of them are fine because they have nice music and you can dance and dine till 10 or 11 o'clock or something, which I think is quite fine. But when people move into the neighborhood, and I'll use the town center in this case, and all of a sudden what they thought was a restaurant or a tea shop or a coffee shop now gets a liquor license, and because the pubs are allowed to be open till 2, they're allowed to be open till 2. The music gets louder, the dancing gets better, and nobody goes home, and we've changed the color of our community. So I totally agree with Councillor Hodge. We need to sit down and address this once and for all. And I only have one question, and that would be to Mr. Gilbert. I don't think we've ever approved 1 till 2 o'clock in the morning, have we? I know.
I don't believe, certainly not in my time here.
No, I'm sure we haven't, because that's where we started getting in, and we've had the one cabaret, and we've had lots of fun with it. And I think we also have we have a lot of different cultures now moving into our community, and some of them I know when I was in Hong Kong once, they don't even start having dinner till 10 o'clock at night, and they want to party through till 2 or 3 in the morning. And, you know, there's all kinds of different cultural differences, and I think we need to look at those too. So I would hope that council could have a workshop, and we can look at this, and hopefully anyone that is inclined to come and put an application in could hold off for a while till we've had time to look at the ramifications to the community as a whole. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. And Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, I would certainly welcome possibility for us to look at some of these issues in a broader way. I too feel like kind of walking on a plank on this one. The ad hoc description is correct. I don't feel like, if any of these reports that come through, that we really have a full grasp of the bigger picture. And there are assertions that are made that we're not really sure are true in terms of, you know, well, we got 2 or 3 people saying it's going to be noisier. Well, is it really going to be noisier? We've got concerns about traffic noise and business impact, and these are all things we have to kind of sort of say, well, does it make sense? Does it fit my ideology? Does it, you know? But in terms of the hard facts or a policy, a consistent kind of framework that we can make these decisions in, that's lacking. So what I'm hearing other people say right now is that they want to turn this down and essentially turn down anything else that comes in until we have an opportunity to better come to grips with the overall issue. I have a question for the city clerk on that particular point. If we turn down this one, is there some time frame that prevents them from? There's a time frame in which they are allowed to reapply, or can they have to wait 6 months, 12 months, or can they just turn around right away after a new policy is adopted, and then they can reapply again? Reapply.
Yeah. I'm not sure of the actual time. I know we have similar things for planning applications. The reality is that we're not the grantor of the license, so it's not that we're turning it down, that we're not supporting it. The person who is turning it down is the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch.
Right. So even if we were to say we don't want to make a decision on this today, the provincial government would take this as not supporting, most likely, and they would get turned down probably, and we don't know. We can't guess what the provincial government would do. But then, in a month or two, we have a framework, a better framework for making these decisions. Could this Town Hall Public House come back to us and say we want to go through the process again? We would allow it. Would the provincial government allow it?
I think that's the right question. I just don't have the specific answer for that, but I can certainly find that out as part of the process that is coming back.
Yeah.
What the provincial government asks is once the clock starts ticking on this, there's a certain period of time. So it's not as if we can defer it and defer their process. They demand an answer within a certain period of time. So it's not we do not possess the ability to defer or halt the process as it goes now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. Well, I'm really torn about this. I really think that we need to sit down and create some framework, so I fully support what Councillor Hodge is suggesting. But I'm just not sure that those applications that are coming in front of us in the coming weeks, and tonight's application and the one from 2 weeks ago, I'm not sure that we ought to be declining them because we don't have this particular framework in place. I have a couple of questions for staff, and one relates to what they've actually applied for. Can we amend that as a council? Can we say, well, we only want you to be open till 2 a.m. on Fridays and Saturdays, as an example?
Mr. Clerk.
Yes, we can. We did that with some of the restaurant food primary applications that came forward.
That was going to be my next question.
And what we did with their applications was permit an extension of hours in the evening. This one is also asking for an extension of hours in the morning. But we supported extension of hours on Friday and Saturday evenings only, I believe it was. It was restricted to the weekend.
Until what time?
Well, the food primaries stop at midnight. And without an extension, and I believe we extended them to 1 a.m.
1 a.m. Right.
And in those instances, the Liquor Control and Licensing Branch followed Council's advice or support in the matter and allowed the applications to have that limited increase in time.
Well, I'm wondering if my council colleagues would be willing to accept an amendment then that we try them out, say, till 2 a.m. on Friday and Saturday only.
I'd second that.
Okay. The original motion is that we not support the application. The amendment would be that we that we support a different application. So I'm pretty certain I'm not going to be able to get past that one.
Maybe you should sing it out.
Maybe if I sang out the rules, yes. Council can vote against the rejection of the application, or council could, that's all council could do. Yeah. Mr. Clerk.
You're correct, Your Worship. Generally, we do not allow amendments that change the intent of the original motion. If this was to be voted to be defeated, a second motion could come forward, but I believe that this motion should stand at this time.
Makes sense.
Yep. The motion stands. Councillor Reamer, anything further?
Well, I just have a question because I certainly support what Councillor Hodge is saying about creating the framework, absolutely. But I don't want to support not supporting the application, but I do want us to go ahead with the framework. So, okay, what's that?
You can vote against the...
Yeah, I'll just vote against it.
Okay. Councillor Rasmussen.
Well, thank you. And this has been around for a little bit. Previous councils, Councillor Reid and I have talked about the food primary, liquor primary licensing. We used to have pubs and restaurants. We don't have that category anymore. And to the city clerk, we went through a question about a moratorium a few years back, in which we were told we were not allowed to do a moratorium.
That is correct.
And that's where we had some, I know Councillor Reid and I had some frustration because we were talking the same thing. How do we put some parameters on this? This is not the first time this has been before our council and dealing with this. And so the only thing we're really left to do is to keep turning them down, which in effect is becoming a moratorium. But then if we, I guess my question to the city clerk is, if we are simply turning them down, does the province then turn around and say, well, you're not really acting on these? Could they still then approve? Because we're just making a recommendation. We have no power of yay or nay on the approval, correct?
That is correct. We use the term support, not support, rather than turn down or deny.
Okay. So,
but to go to your original question, if the city of Coquitlam chooses not to comment, which would be the effect of a moratorium, if you look at the bottom of page 8 of the actual application, so it's page 8 of 10, this is attachment 2, it's the last page before attachment 3. It says, please be advised that if the LCLB does not receive a resolution or a request for an extension of time, this is from the local government, the general manager is authorized to review the application without a resolution and make a decision about the application. So it goes to speak to the fact of what Councillor Asmussen brought up, that moratoriums don't have an effect in the sense that the licensing process would continue without council's input.
and that's the problem that we're running into. If we don't put some, so I understand what Councillor Hodge is saying about needing some framework. And we talked about this, Councillor Reid and I, wanting some framework before. And the liquor law creates problems for cities today. The other issue comes down, if we look at this from a planning perspective, and the other issue is that nightlife in Coquitlam. Are we saying that there shouldn't be nightlife in Coquitlam? I mean, we have concerns in there certain areas, but, you know, we may be a little older, but there's a lot of other younger people that may want to have some nightlife in Coquitlam. And how much do we want to stifle that with a growing community, growing urban center? You know, these are issues that we have to take into consideration as we're moving forward. And how do we have a more wider, vibrant city? But my concern is we can turn this down. I like the suggestion of just saying right now Fridays and Saturdays, moving on with that, because it's in an area that is also supported by transit. There is some residential not right close by it. It's mostly serviced by commercial. And so, and to me it's a pub. And pubs aren't really pubs anymore. They're sort of, what we originally came into a pub was supposed to be the neighborhood, but it's changing. So I'll see where council votes in this one, but I don't want us to be left strictly in the hands of the provincial government if we keep turning these down, and then they turn around saying we're not getting proper direction. We're going to make our decision on their behalf. That's my worry.
I thank the clerk for pointing out the fine print, because, of course, we probably all probably read the whole paragraph. And the paragraph begins with the thought that if we need more than 90 days to make a decision, we can ask the branch for an extension. Is that an option available to us? Could we, at this point, go forward and say, we need extensions on all these applications because by May 15th we're going to have formed a policy?
That would work.
Obviously, the text does say that, and it says it in a different part as well. Having not submitted such a request to the LCLB, I'm not sure how they respond, but I would assume they would be supportive of that. And if we gave them a specific like the time and the intents that we were trying to achieve within that, because obviously we have completed the public consultation phase. We're just not prepared from a policy perspective to give a response. And I think if we communicated that to them, essentially, we do have some time, I believe. I haven't done the math, but because this application was received in early December, even if we were to make that resolution, defer for a week, I can follow up with the LCLB in the meantime, and even if we had to bring it back next week for a final answer, I think we would still be within the 90-day time limit.
So if I was able to move deferral at this time, Mayor, would that be the best thing to do?
Okay, I'm going to...
I'll second.
Okay, there's a motion to defer. I see Councillor Nicholson hasn't spoken yet on the issue. Councillor Nicholson, did you want to speak on the issue before we consider a motion to defer?
I actually did already speak on the issue, Your Worship. I was hoping to speak a second time, but I would be quite happy to speak on the motion to defer.
And your comments were memorable. They moved me.
And believe it or not, I actually had something new to say. So perhaps I'll do both. I will speak to the issue and I'll speak to the deferral.
Okay.
On the issue,
sorry, I need a seconder. One moment then. I need a seconder on the deferral. Terry seconded. Councillor O'Neill seconded. Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you very much. On the issue itself, I wanted to speak to make it clear that I was supporting Councillor Hodges' motion to not support the application, not only so that we could have a conversation about how we deal with these things in the future, but because, in fact, I do not support the application. I looked at the hours. I considered whether some other set of hours than those proposed by the applicant could be supported by me, and they can't. The existing hours, I believe, are adequate to the purpose. On the motion to defer, that's not going to change my mind. I think that, and I don't think we serve the applicant well by letting it hang. I wish to turn it down, and I would like to do that and carry on. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hodge on the motion to defer, so that we can do the work that you've asked us to.
Okay. My main concern on this is that I want to give us time to come up with proper policy. And if deferring gives us that time to at least come with some direction, because I'm not, there are, you know, in some respect, I agree with Councillor Reamer that maybe there's a compromise in here, but I don't feel like we should be making that decision at this table right now, because we are then creating policy on an ad hoc basis. Although I appreciate where you're trying to go with this, and there may be aspects of this that I could live with this, but my main concern has been, let's put some guidelines and create some framework. I don't know that we can get that in a week, but certainly we can at least get some of the answers about, you know, how much time we have from the provincial government, and if we could at least get some direction there, then, you know, we may be forced to make this decision next week, or we may find that we have some more time. So I think based on that, I would support deferral, because all I'm trying to do is give us a chance to create proper policy and create the framework.
Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Worship. Absolutely, I don't think it's possible for staff to come up with the necessary policy documents or to provide council with appropriate information in which to establish some of those policy decisions within the week. The motion to defer a week was simply, and what I'd like to add is that to the motion, and perhaps it complicates it too much, is to say that council requests a deferral past the 90 days, and the deferral a week is only if the LCLB doesn't permit us to do that. And the longer deferral is to get the policy documents and have the discussion that council seems to be requesting.
That's how I interpreted the motion to defer. Yep.
So we would only bring it back next week if the LCLB is not supportive of us.
Yeah. Okay, we're good there. Councillor Sikora on the motion to defer.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I'll not be supporting the deferral. Number one, we're talking tonight about one pub that got turned down 2 weeks ago because it's an area that is all commercial, or rather industrial, and this one here that's owned by the same owner has got a transit and buses. Who's to say that the people, because there's transit and buses, that somehow the people will leave their cars at home and use the transit or the bus? Come on, we're only kidding ourselves. And then we're going to come up on this kind of debate that we're going to have a few weeks from now, how to structure. So we'll be putting one pub against each other because one is on a transit route. So go ahead, guys. You can park your cars in the parking lot, pretend you came on a bus, or pretend you use SkyTrain. Come on. You know, we need to have a guideline for the restaurants and for pubs, one for all, and that's it. And then you don't try and give an upper hand to anybody. So I will not be supporting this. I think that we need to come up with a policy, but if the policy is going to be a later date that somehow, oh, this one can have this license because they are surrounded with high rises and nobody will be driving to it, we're only kidding ourselves. Thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Sikora, the motion to defer doesn't hinged on any two different standards or anything like that. It was just to develop a policy, and it may be that council develops a unified policy that says all of them will be treated exactly the same no matter where they are.
That maybe bothers me a lot.
Okay. Well, it's funny because zoning does allow us to decide where things go. Zoning says we do it by the OCP. The OCP The official community plan says this will go there, the restaurants, that's where commercial goes, that's where, and that's a guide for people who want to do things in our community. They look at the OCP, they say, well, it looks like they would agree to having an industrial building there and not there, so I'm not even going to approach them about the industrial building there. This isn't about cabarets. Councillor Sikora is opposed to cabarets, and in fact, that's his own OCP. He's opposed to cabarets, period. No cabarets. And I agree. I don't like cabarets. We only have one in Coquitlam. It's open till 2. It doesn't really cause the kinds of problems, even though it's right next to residential, but there are others in our history that have caused problems. I don't necessarily want to find a one-size-fits-all, though. So I think the motion to defer allows us to go back and make a decision as to how we want to approach the policy question. Well, to begin with, it'll allow us to ask whether or not we're going to be given time to approach the policy decision prior to actually having to answer on this one. Otherwise, we have to answer tonight, and I'd much rather do a more unified answer that takes into account concerns such as Councillor Sikora's. Councillor Robinson.
I'm going to support the deferral because I think the principle of I guess fairness and consistency and being able to defend decisions on how, when it comes to supporting or not supporting. I like to have some sort of framework that we use or that I use. It doesn't have to be we, but this idea of, well, have we supported any before? And it's like, well, so what kind of criteria are we using? I think that goes to the principle of fairness and justice. And so I think it's important that we think very clearly about this. I also think it's important that we hear from police when we look at this, as well as maybe some from community planning. Just getting some information so that we have some criteria that helps us make these sorts of decisions. I want to point out, I appreciate that Councillor Sikora has a certain view of how people get to pubs, but the next generation really thinks very differently about drinking and driving in ways that certainly even in my generation didn't exist. And during Operation Red Nose, I was blown away at the number of people who use transit to get to their bars. Because when we were promoting Operation Red Nose, they were saying, I always take the bus to come to the pub. And so to me, what that said is that that's a pretty important criteria that we ought to be thinking about. And, 40, 50 years ago, when you drove to the bar and then you drove home drunk, I mean, it was sort of what people did. It didn't make it right then, and we know that it's not right now. But I think it needs to be part of how we think about these sorts of establishments. So I'm looking forward to having a discussion with my council colleagues about the kinds of things we ought to be considering when these applications come forward. I also think that any operators who are thinking about extending their hours because they want to remain competitive, and I appreciate that they're going to pay very close attention to what we come up with and then make their own determinations sort of based on that. So I think it's prudent and wise and helpful to our community for us to have that discussion, and I look forward to it. So I will be supporting this deferral.
Thank you very much. Councillor O'Neill.
Yes, and I seconded the motion to defer, not just to get it on the table, but because I actually do agree with it. Yeah, I think it is prudent, as Councillor Selena Robinson said, and don't know why I used her first name there, but I think we're all looking for what's in the best public interest here. We want to do good for our community. And so part of this framework that we have to develop will have to deal with how we see our community as a button-down, go-to-bed-early place, as a place where there's certain entertainment zones, as there's some nightlife. Councillor Asmussen brought that issue up, and I think it was a very good one, that there are different cultures that do stay up later. My wife and I were in Barcelona a couple of summers ago, and things get started at midnight then, I did. We adjusted in Montreal as well, Quebec City. So that's also how we see the community developing. That's part of this as well. And if we can come to some consensus about that, I'd be very pleased. So that's part of the framework, as well as whether there's buses there, whether there's homes nearby, whether it's an industrial area. These are the sort of ad hoc things that we've been throwing into the mix. But if we can get a more unified vision, that would be most appreciated, and I definitely will support deferral because of that. Thank you.
There you go. So it looks like we're going to defer this. Any further discussion on the deferral motion? The motion is to defer for 1 week pending an agreement that we would be able to defer for longer. All in favor? All opposed? Councillor Sikora is opposed. Motion carries.
And you'll never know who changed my mind.
Yes, he wouldn't want to say once he was in favor. Okay. Mr. Clerk.
Item 8 concerns guidelines for the placement of community user group signs on city property. The staff recommendations that Council approve the guidelines for community user group signs on city property as set out in the report before you.
Second. Moved by Councillor Asmundson, second by Councillor Hodge. Councillor Robinson.
Thank you. I like the direction of this, because this has been a long time coming. But I do have a question about sort of other groups like faith groups, school bazaars, etc. How are we going to roll this out with them? Are they expected to participate in this? I mean, there's a lot of folks, various user groups, other groups. Is there a plan for educating them about this direction?
I don't. Does anyone?
Through the chair, the intention of this was to primarily target it to the support user groups, which are the folk who are putting up the signs currently. There are opportunities for the other community groups to use the community postering boards to advertise their events, and that's sort of considered the appropriate avenue for those sorts of church bazaars, and these are intended to sort of be longer term. Advertising registration for sporting clubs, and rather than to sort of cater to the shorter term.
Okay. So then what comes to mind are things like choral groups and acting theater troupes that also do registrations. And is that going to be part of that? I mean, I'm just looking for some sort of consistency, because the thing is when you identify some groups and then not others, and then how do we wind up hearing about it. So,
and in the past, we have permitted theater groups and choral groups that wanted to put their signs up in these particular locations, provided that they followed the same guidelines to do so.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm really pleased to see this come forward and achieve some degree of formality. Practice that we've had in the past. I'm particularly pleased that the one I drive by most often, and therefore that annoys me the most, is not on the list, and that's Mariner and Dewdney. I do, however, I would like to amend the guidelines, looking at the 5th bullet, which says signs must not exceed 4 feet by 8 feet, and I'm afraid I find 4 feet by 8 feet to be just too large. And I would propose amending that guideline to 2 feet by 4 feet and look for a seconder.
Is there a seconder on that?
By 6?
I'll second on 3 by 6.
I'm sorry, this is how democracy works, you know. It's give and take. Yeah. No more deferrals tonight. Okay, I'm on 3 by 6. Councillor Hodge is a seconder, I think.
No, I'll second 4 by 8.
Okay.
Thank you. Well, I will have nothing further to say on that issue.
There is a motion to amend that item to 3 by 6. It's been moved by Councillor Nicholson, seconded by Councillor Hodge. We're going to have a round of discussion on this, and there may well be other items. I'm going to actually, I would suggest.
QB.
Well, okay, let's do that. We'll start at QA. A QB, rather. And I will speak on that one. I was going to actually speak on the question in general. My issue has never been the proliferation of signs. It's the proliferation of different sized signs in different places. So if we have one that's 1 foot by 8 feet and another one that's 4 foot square, and we have and they're all over the place, it begins to look like like a municipal election. Or
2 by 2.
Everybody's
2 by 2.
Everybody's municipal election in Port Moody. Then, okay. The challenge, I think, is trying to maintain some kind of a little bit of order, if it's possible. Because if we don't maintain some order, then we end up with a whole bunch of garbage companies putting up their signs as well, and we're going to have trouble enforcing those. So I've always tried to push us toward having some common signage structure, a signage structure that, for example, is 8 feet tall, and it would have 18-inch by 4-foot slots that you could put in your panel sign, your coroplast sign, that essentially, and the banner could be above it that Coquitlam Get Active or Coquitlam Loves Amateur Sport or whatever it is, and allows all the sporting groups to actually put their sign in for the 6 weeks that there's applicable to them, and then we rotate out, and we've always got a sign it would actually lower the cost to sporting groups, and it would make some uniformity. Find a size that everyone agrees on, and I was actually ready to agree to the 2 by 4 because that would be almost perfect. It would be you'd allow 4 signs in a 10 by 4 foot structure. There's a structure like it on Brunette Highway coming into New Westminster, but it relates to service clubs. Same idea though, where they just you insert the name of the service club in a wooden frame. That lowers the cost to the community groups, but it also makes this formalized in a way that people understand the message that the city actually is endorsing these programs. These are sports. These are groups. It doesn't address the church bazaar or the other ones that we see as well, but this program could apply to those, and we could end up with this formalized structure for the ones we actually want to encourage, the ones we subsidize. Most of these ones we actually publicly subsidize with taxpayer dollars by allowing them to use our fields or our facilities. So I think the 4 by 8 is way too big. 2 of those is way more sign than I want to see at the corner of Mariner and Austin, and yet we could have 8 of them, and it will look like one of the car dealers on Barnett, and I want to have us address those as well. This is the motion to amend to.
It is.
Yes, it's the motion to amend. It was related to the size, and that's why I wanted a formal size.
I told him you get around to it. No round size.
Councillor Asmundson is the next speaker. Please stick to the topic.
I'll try as well as the last speaker did to the topic. I have no problem. I think this has come up for a number of years. Councillor Hodge is now part of the Sports Council. This came up through the CFSA. It's been around for years. About 3 or 4 years, they've been trying to the sports groups have realized that there's a proliferation of signs. Signs stay up outside the registration time. And I give
on the issue of 3 by 6.
Yes, I'm just doing the same thing as yourself. But the question I do have is, and I would like you to activate Councillor Hodge's mic, if you could, because I have a question for Councillor Hodge. It relates to I'd like to know is that, and the reason I'm giving that history relates to the question, and it relates to the part that I'm going to talk about, not completely as someone else, but the issue is that this has been around. The sports community and the field sports groups have realized this issue for a while now, and they wanted themselves better control of the signage in there. Now, we've had a number of meetings. You've had meetings with the groups. You've gone through this groups. This is why this report was here. And we have a 4 by 8 recommendation here, and we're going to change it or possibly change it smaller, but was that just sort of put out there, or was there a specific reason why they felt for exposure advertising for a 4 by 8 size? Before I got some other questions, but I would like to have an understanding of what the discussion was and why they came to that, because this is most of their recommendations and their work on this that you've been involved with. Right. Your Honor.
Why don't we activate Councillor Hodge's microphone? Well,
Okay, yeah, and thank you, through the chair, to Councillor Asmussen. I think you're right. I think what was great about this is that the Sports Council, which is made up of a great number of sports groups, including the CFSA, the fact that they came together and wanted to be part of the solution and realized that there was a problem there and they wanted to be part of the solution. They've made a number of recommendations that are enclosed here. Some of those recommendations came directly from them. The size recommendation was something that was already on the table. They did not specifically choose that size, other than they agreed that they should be no larger than that was the maximum size. My recollection is that a number of the signs that are placed out there currently, and particularly a lot of the ones that we see on the sides of the school fences and things, are not the full 4x8. They are smaller. So this was only intended to be the maximum size. But in actual fact, many of them are smaller. The other thing that was interesting was that in our discussions, it became apparent that a number of the groups are in fact moving away from signs altogether and looking at social media and other ways. So there is also a recognition that they are moving away from signs in general. So I think for that reason, they weren't too specific about the size. But to be honest, the size was not part of that discussion, and that if we were to go to something slightly smaller, that probably wouldn't create an issue. I don't think, given that this has already come to us once, I don't know that we want to go back to them on the sign size issue. I think that we should just lower the size and keep the intent of the bylaw, which is to primarily look at locations and time of posting rather than the total size.
And that's perfect. And thank you for that, Councillor Hodge. I appreciate it.
Rasmussen, go ahead.
Thank you. Well, I was still on the floor. That's still my control. I hadn't given up the floor, had I? Thank you for the question.
Go ahead.
So that's good to know, because I'll support a 3x6. When I looked at this, I thought 4x8 was quite large when I saw it. But once again, my thought was that the group had been involved in this. And I give credit to the groups for recognizing the problem and even putting the biggest things they want to do is note the locations, but also a time limit on this, that they come down. They have a certain period of time, then they've got to come down. And it takes away the friction between them. And social media is an issue, but a lot of groups aren't as organized or as well with social media as the others. So signs are still a very valuable asset for helping out. So I'll support moving to 3x6, and thank you for the explanation, Councillor Hodge.
Very good. Thank you, Councillor Asmussen. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. And Councillor Asmussen has just asked Councillor Hodge the question I was going to ask, so thank you.
There you go. Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, I'm personally not very bothered by the signs that are out there now. They don't aggravate me, because so I've said that before publicly. When I drive by the intersection of Duty and Truck and Mariner, I'm not bugged by that at all. I've got no problem with the 4x8 sign, and if people, as Councillor Hodge said, people aren't going the maximum route anyway. They're not, some of them aren't even going to the signs. 4x8, by the way, is the size of a standard sheet of plywood. And so somebody wants to build the maximum size sign, well, they're going to have to get a 4x8. They're going to have to trim it down. That's all that much extra hassle. So, I don't have a problem with staying with 4x8. As Councillor Hodge himself said, they're not going to that size anyway. If a few of them go that big, fine. I've got no problem with it. And now that we've got the areas specified and duration and all that sort of stuff, that's great. That's peace, order, and good government.
Perfect sense.
Actually, on that point, I wonder if the mover of the amendment would consider an alternative on the shape, 3x6 or 4x4, either one.
I was going to.
Because that would answer that would answer that question. If that's any objections to that being the amendment would be limited to 3x6 or 4x4. Okay, Councillor Sikora.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I think it's time that we got on with whether the size would be, and I think 4x4 is fine. I have no difficulty for a sports group using 4x8s, but certainly at election time, I'd like to stay with our 2x2s. I think that's about the max, because can you imagine 30-odd people running for election with 4x8 signs? But anyways, even the Rose Garden, people have asked me that they'd like to put some signs up, but there are very limited spots. Well, there's 6 spots here where they can put their signs up, and I think that, you know what, good suggestion, Mayor, 4x4. I think the sports groups would probably buy that. And I think it would be great, but we need to get on with it because, you know, the sports group are suffering. Because the last one, when it came to us about 6 weeks ago, there was somebody asked for a staff report. You get a staff report, we still haven't got it. So, you know, it takes time, and some the sports people are suffering. So I think it's time. And also the Rose Garden people should be able to put up a sign also.
This is the staff report.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a staff report, yeah. But
Okay. Okay. Councillor Robinson on the motion to amend to 3x6 or 4x4.
Well, what's really interesting is that clearly size matters. And I agree with Councillor O'Neill that this feels like what my kids would call a first world problem. It's sort of like, if this is it, you know, and I will support whatever. I'm just glad that we have the structure, the placement, whatever size it is, whatever works for folks is fine. So prepared to go with whatever the majority wants on this one.
Okay. There you go. So the motion is to amend the size.
Just before we move on, sorry, on that discussion, I did want to mention that I understand that there are in fact a number of groups that have existing signs that are 4x8. So they will be required to make new signs, and I also understand that they're quite expensive. So
You understand? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
That they are quite expensive.
Mm-hmm.
So.
yeah, they are 4x8.
Okay. Okay.
Where's the discussion, the sign?
And that any existing signs be given a year to swap out? Yeah.
No.
Okay.
What? Yeah, this is just...
Okay, we're going to see one last adjustment of the amendment. I don't know if this meets with everyone's approval, but that any signs that are larger than that be given a year's grandfathering. Any objection to that?
No.
Okay, so if the motion passes to reduce the maximum sign to 4x4 or 3x6, any existing 4x8 signs would be grandfathered for a year.
I have not spoken yet.
I know you haven't spoken yet. We're just trying to make sure we know what you're speaking on. And that's the motion that you're speaking on, the motion to amend. Councillor Reid, please provide us your wisdom.
My wisdom?
Yes.
That would take much too long. I like it the way it's written. It must not exceed 4x8. Let people pick the size of sign they want. Come on, since when do we have to be so conformed to everything? Now we've got them putting them in the places. Now you want to make the certain signs.
Okay. So the motion is to amend to 3x6 or 4x4 with a one-year grandfathering of anything larger. Oops. Councillor Reamer, Councillor Hodge. Councillor Reamer.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to vote against the amendment then, given the information that Ms. Bradfield just provided us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay. So we're going to go a second round of debate on an amendment. Councillor Hodge.
I was just answering a question earlier. This is my weigh in on this. I think that the Sports Council has made a recommendation. Clearly at that, they did not have a concern over the size of the signs. And the real issue that brought this forward was the number of signs, the number of locations. And we have some groups have existing signs. They are expensive to produce. Trying to figure out who's grandfathered, because the signs come down, then they come back up. They'd have to all bring them in and have them registered or something. How would you figure out who's grandfathered? So, you know, we can come back and look at this, but, you know, and a lot of the groups have already made 4x4 signs. So I think that the intent of this was to limit the duration of the signs, the locations, and wasn't really an issue of how big the signs are. So I think we should, I'm going to not support an amendment. I think we should move ahead as the recommendation is written.
We actually don't applaud in council chambers.
Can we pound the desk?
Looking for another 2
Okay.
4 months.
Councillor Asmundson on the motion to amend.
Just one question through to staff and about 4x8 signs, and I have no problem defeating the amendment. The only question I have is in regards to we're limiting these to certain locations. And if people have 4x8 signs, is there enough space in those areas for a multiple 4x8 signs in that area? It's a spacing issue. Is there enough space in those areas?
Through the chair, to this point in time, at the existing locations where they have been put up, there has been sufficient space to accommodate them.
That's fine.
Okay. The motion is to amend that one clause down to 3x6 or 4x4 with a one-year grandfather. All in favor of the amendment? All opposed? The amendment fails with Councillors Hodge, Reid, Sikora, Asmundson, Raymer, Robinson, and O'Neill. No, actually, Councillor Nicholson was on board. He moved the amendment.
For a short time.
Yeah. Motion fails.
I always listen. I don't always change my mind.
The motion, it was your motion. You're not allowed to change your mind.
Oh, yes, I am.
Back to QA. Councillor Nicholson on QA. Are you done?
I've nothing further. I'll certainly vote in favor.
Councillor Hodge.
Thank you. I'll get to discuss the matter at hand. As I mentioned earlier, the Sports Council did a lot of work on this with staff, and I'd like to sort of thank the members of the Sports Council, primarily because they recognize that there is an issue in the community, and they wanted to be part of the solution. They spent a great deal of time looking at some of the problems and ways that they could become part of the solution, including picking 6 locations around the city and working or picking a number of locations around the city, working with staff to identify which locations were best. Also limiting the length of time that the signs would be in place based on a date that would be placed on the sign, a registration date. And also one of the ideas that the Sports Council came up with was also making sure that there's some sort of contact information on the sign, so that if we do have a sign that's in the wrong place or a sign that has to be picked up by bylaws, that the bylaw staff have a contact for that. So I think that it's a good compromise. I think that one of the problems that we have in the community is we want to have our youth engaged in sports. We build great facilities around the city, and we want to encourage our youth to get involved and get active. And this is right now one of the primary ways that our sports groups find post registration and let our residents know that their club is accepting kids to play in sport. The locations that were chosen for a number of reasons. They're recommended based on visibility, safety for the volunteers, stopping vehicles to put them out, and they also wanted to make sure that these spots that they selected were geographically placed around the city, so they weren't all in one concentration. And I'm hopeful that we may have found a solution to a problem that some residents have been complaining. I know at one point, I understand that Bylaws did a roundup of signs or late last year and picked up 500 signs. So I think clearly that we do need to put some parameters on this, and I believe that these recommendations will do that and put the community groups on notice. If they don't, then we'll have to sort of review it.
There you go. And then one of them will buy a derelict panel van, and they'll paint their message on it and park it in a prominent parking lot like some others do, and find a way around it. I don't think our sports groups will do that, because we've seen a great amount of support from our sports groups and a great amount of cooperation trying to find solutions to these issues. So I appreciate all their efforts, and now let's vote on this. The motion is the staff recommendation. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
We got everybody.
Oh, Councillor Reid wants a recount on the basis that round signs are good. I'm just joking.
4x8 round signs.
Mr. Clerk, help us.
That is the last formal item on this agenda, and a motion to adjourn is in order.
One moment. Good motion is to adjourn. All in favor? Opposed? Carried unanimously.
That Rita Knight, she's not